So today, basically, this is kind of an introductory lesson where I'll try to draw you kind of a map of the topics from the TOLC test that you have to study, that we are planning to study in order to take the test itself. So if you go for CISIA website, they were mentioning the map, not really map, but syllabus of, let's say, maths for Толк-ай or maths for Толк-и, and there you could see the topics, right? And in the case of logic, they just write the logic section does not require specific preparation. But today I'll kind of show you the map of things that we are planning to study in our course. And yeah, we'll cover also reading and science, just in general to see. Okay, so let me write talk, and I'll draw kind of a tree for islands. So the first one, of course, will be mass. And then we've got logic. And then we've got, it's called verbal comprehension, but I would refer it as reading. And for those who are doing Толк-ай, you'll have one more section, which is science. So let me kind of write it in, denote it as another color. Okay, so every island has kind of a steps in order to complete. Let's imagine that we are kind of in a game and we have to complete each level. For example, we start with math and we have to step by step complete like level by level until we are done with math. And in this way, I will try to show you the possible topics. Usually in math, topics are kind of ordered. So in order to know something, you need some prerequisites. So we'll start like from easiest to hardest one. Okay, so let's start with math for talk. So like the first topic is like the easiest one is to understand the XY plane, like how to kind of being able to see the point, because in the XY plane you'll have point which has two coordinates, one on X and one on Y, and we'll try to study with this. So let me write X, Y coordinate plane. I'll just write plane. So once you've done this XY plane, there are two kind of introductory topics, which are linear equation and then quadratic equations. Okay, so the graph of linear equations is just some line, so with some slope and with x, y intercept, right? And the graph of quadratic equation, it's parabola. So it's kind of a curve. The shape of parabola, of course, depends from equation itself. And yeah, like in our first class, we'll study these three topics. And then we'll go for the practice problems that we'll take from the past Толк-ай, Толк-и tests. And once you've studied this, the second step, let's say the second level, is to study equations. Like, I think this is kind of the most fundamental thing that you should be able to know how to how to work with equations, how works the left side, the right side of equations, how to massage equations, and that would be really useful for the future topics. So I'll write. So equations is kind of a expression that at the middle has the sign equal, and then you have the left side. Let me write the left side and the right side. usually equations are one variable equations where you have to figure out what's the value of the variable. And yeah, like there are many operations with equations, so you can at the same time work with the left side and with the right side. So just knowing these basic skills, how to operate with equations, how to multiply both left and right side, how to square root both left and right side, or how to, let's say, make the power of 2 left and right side is just the basics that you should know. After we've done equations, the next part is called inequalities. So in the inequalities, this is really similar to equations because we are looking for the one variable. But in the case of equations, you'll have one solution, maybe two solutions, maybe three solutions, maybe four solutions. So you can kind of have limited number of solutions. But in the case of inequalities, you may have, of course, you may have one solution. You may have 100 solutions. You may have infinite number of solutions. So in inequalities, you have a broad kind of a range, possible range of solutions. In the case of equations, you have specific number of solutions. So this is the difference. And basically, inequalities is the expressions where they are separated with the signs, which is more, less, more or equal, or less or equal. So once you know how to work with these two, basically this is the key part of the math. Once you are really fluent at equations, at inequalities, you can go on and continue easily, like overcoming next problems, next topics. So the next step, I will write the next level. This is the level of exponentials and powers. So let me write. So in this level, we'll kind of go through the main properties, exponential properties like product rule, division rule, power rule, and so on and so forth. Once you know these main properties, main laws, I would say, then you can work with exponential equations or exponential inequalities. So in order to study exponentials, you should know how to work with equations and inequalities. So let me write like this. So you'll have exponential equations and you'll have exponential inequalities. And at the end, you just need to know like how it looks like on the XY plane, like how to sketch exponential function. So it would probably, I'll write graph of exponentials.
I have a question. The exponentials is the same as powers, right?
Yes, it's like, you have
Yeah.
2 to the power of 4, and this is exponentials. Powers,
Yes, yes.
these are like interchangeable words. Yeah, it is. So once you complete the third level, so the next level, it's kind of a more complicated level, more difficulty required level, which is logarithms. So basically, in order to solve logarithms, in order to study logarithms, you should be fluent at exponentials because logarithms are inverse of exponentials, right? So they're closely related to each other. In order to study this, you should be fluent at this. And so logarithms have, of course, they have properties. They have some rules. We'll cover some properties and rules of logarithms. Let me write properties, rules. Okay, once we are fluent at properties and rules, we'll go for logarithmic equations and logarithmic inequalities. So let me write equations and inequalities. So you see how equations and inequalities are really important to link those topics. That's why, of course, we are studying it before exponentials and before logarithms. Okay, the next level, I would say the next level, it's not kind of a full level, but let's say it's kind of a, let's say the level that lies between the fourth and fifth level. I would really ask you not to draw on the map, so not to distract me. Thank you. It's kind of a small level. I write like 4.5 is somewhere between the level of 4 and level of 5. It's basically the properties of numbers. I think this is like easy level, just to be able to not waste time during the talk questions, because sometimes there could be the questions and you should know what's the rational numbers, what's the irrational numbers. Right, rational, irrational. So once you know what's the rational and irrational numbers, you'll go for the prime numbers. Some property of even numbers and odd numbers, and so on and so forth. So this is the kind of a small level of understanding how to work with numbers. And once you've done this level, we go for the level 5. So let me write 5. So far, level 5 is kind of the broad level. It's kind of the level that requires a lot of effort in order to complete. In the level 5, we will study geometry. So there are a lot of things to cover in geometry. So for example, we'll study areas, perimeters, you'll study volumes, you'll study also.
This for Толк-e also?
Yes, it is for Толк-e as well. In Толк-e, you'll cover geometry for sure. So areas, perimeters, volumes, total surface areas. Once you complete this pass, we'll go for the part of triangles. So mainly there are many problems on triangles. So in order to solve, let's say you have rectangle problem. In order to solve rectangle problem, you need to be able to solve triangle problem because they are linked. So like we'll study right triangles. We will study equilateral triangles. We will study isosceles triangles. And so on and so forth. Just the main intake from triangles is to be able to know how to use Pythagorean theorem. And how to work with angles. Yes, yes. So once we've done with this, we'll talk about ratio and proportions. Usually ratio proportions problems come with together with geometry problems. For example, you have a rectangle with ratio like 1 and 4. like basically the length is 4 and the width is 1. So build this rectangle, find out what's the area of this rectangle, or find out what's the perimeter of this rectangle. So we should be able to know how to work with ratio and how to work with proportions. Okay, just give me a moment. I should see the notes. Okay, so the next problem is, let me write 6, is the problem on percentage. So basically how to compute percentage, how to use cross multiplication, how to figure out one using another. And once you've done this percentage, there is another question. Can you discuss more? Okay, I'll talk about it. Sure. And this is pretty much that's it for those who are studying Толк-е and Толк-ай. These are the first, let's say, 6 general levels. For Толк-е, this is the last level, which is percentage. And for those who are studying Толк-ай, on top of this, you have 2 more levels. Let me write the level number 7, which is trigonometry. So in this level, basically, I will introduce the sine, cosine, and tangent. I will introduce the triangle and how to compute sine, cosine, and tangent using the right triangle. In the case of the right triangle, just using the Pythagorean theorem, I will introduce the main trigonometric formulas. So let me write introduction to sine, cosine, tangent, and then we'll see the unit circle. Basically, we'll use XY plane and we'll build unit circle. Unit circle is basically the circle which has the radius 1. And using this radius 1 and using this angle, let's say alpha, we'll compute all sine, cosine, tangent values from 0 to 360 degrees. And on top of this, we'll convert angles to radians. And then we will see pi values. By the way, pi is the same as 180 degrees. So once you've done it, we'll see trigonometric equations and trigonometric inequalities. So the same equations and inequalities that we are covering here, we will use it in order to solve trigonometry problems. So let me write equations and inequalities. So in order to solve it, you really have to be fluent in equations and inequalities. Okay, and the last part for Толк-ай is the level. Let me write kind of a boss level. The last level of math for Толк-ай would be statistics. So in order to overcome statistics, we start with easy topics such as mean. Like what is mean? Mean is the same as average of the set. And then we'll go for frequency distribution. Then once we know frequency distribution, we'll go for tables. Once we know the tables, we'll go for graphs. Usually graphs are, it could be histogram, it could be some sketch, and so on and so forth. For example, of course, in order to work with graphs, you have to be fluent at XY plane, at coordinates. For example, you have XY plane, and then you have kind of this graph where you have some peak, and using this data, you have to figure out what's the average value. Let's imagine that this graph shows the average age of some workers in some company, for example. And using this graph, you have to figure out what's the average age of the worker in this company. So these kind of problems you might appear on Толк-ай statistics. And the last part, it's called variance. Usually in the variance, you're given a set, you're given some numbers, and you have to compute what's the variance of this set. And we'll learn how to do it. And with this, the math part is done for Толк-ай and for Толк-ай. So basically the first 6 classes are for everyone, for those who are doing Толк-ай and Толк-ай, Толк-ай and Толк-ай. And the last 2 classes are for those who are doing Толк-ай only. Okay, do you have any questions so far on math? Of course, it looks a bit hard, but we have time. We have around 2 months to cover all topics in details, to study it, and we should be able to fluent at every topic that I wrote here down. Like you will be able to solve problems on these topics after you've done the course. All right, now we go for Толк logic part. So let me write it here. Basically, the logic is the same for Толк-ай and for Толк-ай. Yes, we'll go for Science Island as well at the end. Just give me a moment. Okay, so let me write logic. Okay, in order to study logic, of course, like they do not give you some materials. In the site, there is no specific syllabus for logic, kind of a topics that you should be able to know in logic in order to do it. They just tell you, you just rely on your logical intuition and you solve logic. Your logical intuition should be enough in order to complete logic section. But of course, you can rely on your logical intuition. Maybe you're really good, you're a genius. You can overcome logic section without studying it, just relying solely on your logical intuition. But usually, like for 99% of people, this is not the case because we are not really logically intuitive, and that's why we need to see some topics, some theorems, some, let's say, rules in order to overcome logic problems. And the first level, it's kind of at the basic, the beginner level, the fundamental things of logic is the statement. So it's a really important part to understand what the statement is. Basically, the statement is the sentence that could have 2 forms. The first one, it could be true. So your statement could be true. And the second part, that your statement could be false. And that's it. So in order to understand statement has 2 forms. It's true or it's false. And based on this, you'll see the truth table. So you'll denote statements as some letters. For example, statement A and then statement B. So once you have 2 statements connected with connector, so you have 2 type of connectors, which is and or, and or. So you might have A and B, or you might have A or B, and you should be able to know what's the difference between A and B and A or B. So you're building a complex statement, and that's why you're building a truth table for this complex statement. Okay, once you've done it, the next part is to understand how to negate the statement. Let me write negation. So basically negation is just adding not to the statement. So if your statement was true, it becomes false, or if your statement was false, it becomes true. And once you've done it, there is a part, I think all of this is just the tools in order to understand De Morgan's law. De Morgan's law.
This is all done in the truth table, right? I think I took a class in discrete mathematics. It was
Yes,
something like that. Yes.
it is really,
It's simple, I think,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
it's really similar that the things that you're studying in discrete math, it's really
Yeah.
similar here in talk logic, basically how to negate. In discrete math, instead of this, you use, I think, tilde.
Yes, exactly.
Then you have, then it's really good for you that you've studied it before to understand it easier.
Okay.
And the last
I
part,
guess the only important thing is to understand the statements and put it into a mathematic rise, like to understand the sentence and put it into something in
yes,
mathematic kind of thing. Yeah.
yes, but it is not really, it's just to understand it. But during your test, you will not put it everything to, let's say, mathematical equation. It's just to understand when it's true, when it's false, and how to easily compute, how to easily understand
Mhm.
if your statement is true or false based on
Mhm.
these two connectors, and or like usually in logic talk, they use only these two connectors. So there is no XOR, there is no NOR, there is no NAND, and so on and so forth. Only these two. Okay, this is kind of a first level, the logic. So once you finish it, you're pretty kind of have a solid knowledge. These are the basics, fundamental of logic. So the second part is called the level of if conditions. If conditions. So anytime you are learning English, I think you have also the topic which is called if conditions. Basically, the conditions which start with if, and it's not really related to English actually. In the logic, if conditions are basically if A, then B. So in this form, and you have to do some logical inferences based on the if conditions. Usually you use A implies B. So instead of if, you can write imply. And you'll see 4 different forms of if conditions, which are converse, inverse, and contrapositive. And you'll see the difference between those, and you'll see when they are true and when they are false. So once you've done if conditions, you'll really connect it, if conditions, to all statements. So basically you have all statements. For example, all dogs live on Mars, or all Italians drink coffee. These kind of statements are closely related to if conditions. So you can kind of convert if conditions to all statements, or you can go from all statements to if conditions. Sometimes it's really useful to do it. And then you'll have to negate if conditions and negate all conditions as well, all statements. Then you have the third level, which is, I would say, kind of the hardest level of the logic section, which is called necessary and sufficient conditions. So once you are in necessary and sufficient conditions, basically you have statement A is necessary for B, or A is sufficient for B, like this kind of form, but there is also connection between necessary and if conditions. So basically, in order to study necessary and sufficient conditions, you should be fluent at if conditions. So they're really closely related. You can go from if conditions to necessary, or you can return from necessary to if, and the same with sufficient. So all these things are closely related. So that's why you're studying them one by one. Perfect. So the fourth level is the level of, I would say, more math than logic, but they include this topic in the logic section. So basically it's called set theory. Like how to work with sets. Sets are usually the collection of elements. For example, you have set A, and then you have elements, like let's say in this case, you have numbers 1, 2, 5, 7, and so on and so forth. And you should be able to work with sets are, usually you work with sets with connectors. In this case, you use conjunction and disjunction. Basically, instead of like these difficult words, you can use union or intersection. So these are more easier way to understand it. So this sign is for union, this sign for intersection. And you're using the circles. Maybe you've heard previously, it's called Venn diagram. Basically, you draw the circles, and then you try to understand what's the connection between two sets. Maybe they have some common elements. Maybe they don't have some common elements, so they are not related to each other, and so on and so forth. So we'll draw a lot of circles in order to understand sets. Okay, once you've done with sets, the next level would be the level of, let's say, like truth contradiction, I would say. Let me write truth contradiction. For example, truth contradiction is usually appears when you have multiple statements that are contradicting to each other. For example, let's imagine we have two girls like Anna and let's say Alisa.
Like one of them lies, two of them are saying the truth kind of questions, right?
Yes. Actually, there is a game. We'll study this as a game. There is a game. It's called Knights and Knaves, I think. Knives
Yeah.
and knaves always lies, and you have to figure out who is the knight and who is the knaves. And yeah, you have two statements. Maybe Anna says that Alisa is lying. And then Alisa says that Anna lies. And you have to figure out who tells the truth if they're contradicting to each other. And yeah, once you've studied it, the last part is again the part that was taken from math, the part which is probability. So in order to study probability, like in logic, of course, they use some problems which requires the knowledge of probability in order to solve them, but you will solve them using your logic. But in order to solve them, you should know some probability theories. And so that's how we'll study some basic probabilities. And then we'll try to, usually it's called optimization problems. Let me write optimization problems. For example, you have a box and there are 5 green, 5 red, and 5 blue, let's say, pencils. And they ask you, in order to be 100% sure that you have at least one blue pencil, how many times you should take from the box pencils in order to be 100% sure. And this is the optimization problem. And in order to solve it, you should know some probability theory. And yeah, that's basically it. The logic part. And this is the same for who are doing Толк-е and who are doing Толк-ай. Good. Do you have any questions here? All right, no questions. We go for the reading part. So our next island is the, I would say, reading island. So in the reading island, in Толк-ай, so let me write Толк-ай, and in the Толк-ай, they use the texts from the same database. For example, that's why you could have the same text in Толк-ай and the same text in Толк-ай. Sometimes you could have different texts, like some text in Толк-ай and some text in Толк-ай, they are not the same, but sometimes you could have the same text, but anyway, they use the same text from the same database, and there is probability for Толк-ай students to have Толк-ай texts, and there is probability for Толк-ай students to have Толк-ай texts. And that's why we are preparing for reading together, because they are like the same text, which is around 600, 700 words. I would say intermediate level text. And the only difference between reading of Толк-ай and reading of Толк-ай, that for the reading of Толк-ай, you're given 30 minutes. And for the reading of Толк-ай, you are given 20 minutes. For the same two texts, for the same 10 questions, by the way. So if you're doing Толк-ай, for you, it's easier to get 10 out of 10 on reading. If you're doing Толк-ай, for you, it's a little bit harder to achieve 10 out of 10 on reading, but we'll see how to take 10 out of 10. In the case of Толк-ай, we will see the kind of a strategy. So basically, you read the text fully, and then you go for the questions because you have time to read it. In the case of Толк-ай, I'll show you some techniques on how to scan the text, how to figure out what's the main purpose of the text without reading it. And usually for Толк-ай, you don't read text fully, but you scan it, and then you right away go for the questions, and then you answer the questions by the paragraph. Usually in both questions are the same. The first questions are the questions on main idea and so on and so forth, and the last questions are the questions on the conclusion. And the rest questions are related to paragraphs. That's why it's pretty similar for both. Okay, so we have only one class for reading. I'll try to share all techniques that I know. And then you have around 14 or 15 texts to practice. So basically these 14 or 15 texts are coming from the past Толк-ай and Толк-ай tests. And so you will have time to kind of experience, to experiment with one technique, experiment with another technique, and the technique which works best for you, you can apply it and then you can master it. So that's why you have only one class on reading. And the rest, I'm pretty sure that you already been preparing for Толк-ай, for the IELTS or for the TOEFL, and you know how to solve the reading passages, how to complete them. Okay, good. And the last part, basically this is the part for those who are doing Толк-ай. So let me write science. And the science is basically the branch of, basically the mix of physics and chemistry. So we'll have two classes to complete the whole science. And that's why in order to complete the science, I would suggest you to just give me a moment. Someone is joining. Good. Okay, in order to complete the science, I'll give you the list of topics and the list, kind of a playlist of videos which you have to study by yourself. And during the classes, we will mainly practice the science problems. And of course, I'll try to explain the kind of a way to solve the science problem without knowing science. For example, if you have to solve the physics, I'll show you some techniques how to solve the physics without any computations, but using your logic, using your educated guess, educated elimination, And by this, you could be able to solve like around 60-70% of the science problems. Of course, for the rest, 40-30%, you should be able to know how to compute the science problems. Okay, good. So basically, this is the journey that we are planning to do on preparation for TOLC. And yeah, it will take around 2 months to complete all these topics. And so far, do you have any questions?